That being said, our concern, and is a concern I had when I was at the FBI overseeing the counterterrorism efforts, is not so much that we know those that we know about, those who are on the watch list, those who are on the no-fly list.
You can see the rest of this at cspan.org. The House is coming back in now for votes on measures debated earlier this afternoon.
Resolution 773, resolution providing for consideration of the bill H.R. 5544 to authorize and expedite a land exchange involving National Forest System land in the Laurentian District of the Superior National Forest and certain other National Forest System land in the state of Minnesota that has limited recreational and conservational resources and lands owned by the state of Minnesota in trust for the public school system that are largely scattered in checkerboard fashion within the Boundary Waters Canoe Area wilderness and have important recreational, scenic, and conservation resources and for other purposes, and providing for consideration of the bill H.R. 5949 to extend the FISA Amendments Act of 2008 for 5 years.
Referred to the House calendar and ordered printed. Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, proceedings will resume on motions to suspend the rules and previously postponed. Votes will be taken in the following order. H.R. 6122 by the yeas and nays. H.R. 2139 by the yeas and nays. H.R. 6186 by the yeas and nays. The first electronic vote will be conducted as a 15-minute vote. Remaining electronic votes will be conducted as a 5-minute vote. The unfinished business is on the vote of motion, the gentleman from California, Mr. Lundgren, to suspend the rules and pass H.R. 6122, on which the yeas and nays are ordered. The clerk will report the title of the bill.
Union Calendar Number 448, H.R. 6122, a bill to revise the authority of the Librarian of Congress to accept gifts and bequests on behalf of the library and for other purposes.
The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass the bill? Members will record their votes by electronic device. This is a 15-minute vote.
These are the first votes in the House after a month-long recess. There are 3 votes in this series. This one would authorize the Librarian of Congress to accept gifts and bequests on behalf of the library. Later this week, House Republicans plan to vote on another extension of federal spending. It would cover the cost of federal operations through April of next year. Here's an update on the week ahead from a Capitol Hill reporter.
What's the picture like for lawmakers this week? What's on their agenda?
Well, in the House, they're taking up actually a whole bunch of different bills, but the big ones are supposed to be a continuation of government funding for at least stopgap measure to take them into the next year. If they don't do anything, funding for the government would expire at the end of this month, so they're looking at extending it all the way past the potential lame duck session and into next year, essentially taking that out of all the other fights that are going on. They're also talking about an extension of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, FISA as it's known. They are considering whether or not they'll deal with the Farm Bill, which is always sort of hanging out there. And then over in the Senate, you have the Senate is planning on taking up a what's called the Veterans Job Corps bill, which would create a Veterans Job Corps similar to some of the Great Depression programs. This would essentially take returning veterans and push them into jobs, government jobs like firefighters and police, and also conservation work.
Well, you mentioned the temporary funding, the continuing resolution to keep the government running. Is there agreement between the parties in both chambers on short-term funding?
There is, and this is actually a big surprise. Normally this is a huge fight. This time around, actually, the leaders of the Democratic leadership in the Senate and the Republican leadership in the House actually a couple months ago announced that they were going to take this off the table. They'd agreed on we call it a short term, but it's a pretty long-term extension. It extends into next year, and they've already agreed on the outlines of that. They're still working on the details, but they've agreed on that, and more importantly, the conservative factions sound like they are not going to put up a big fight. There's a big fight often brewing on this over what the overall number is. You know, a continuing resolution essentially takes all of the current programs and extends them into the next year. The question is, conservatives usually want to see the overall spending number come down a little bit, and what they've done is they've agreed to use the numbers that were in last year's debt deal. They've agreed to adhere to those, and so that's taken a lot of the fight out of this issue this time around.
Now, there's a bill coming up later this week dealing with sequestration. Can you tell us about that bill and what lawmakers are likely to bring up during that debate?
Sure, and this comes on the heels of a debate that's been happening over the last couple of weeks or so. About a month or so, actually, it was right before they went out back in late July, early August. Congress passed a bill that required the president to lay out specific sequestration cuts, where the defense cuts and the other cuts would come from specifically, trying to put some more political pressure on all sides to try and get rid of these cuts. The president has actually missed the deadline for doing that. He signed the bill, but missed the deadline for providing the information. The White House now says that'll be coming out on Friday. Just ahead of that, the House is going to vote to try and undo those cuts. They say they've already taken a couple of different votes to undo the defense cuts, and they're going to take one more vote on that. It's essentially, that bill is not likely to go anywhere in the Senate. Democrats actually like having, and some Republicans like having those sequesters hanging out there, these automatic spending cuts hanging out there as pressure to try and force both sides to actually get a long-term deal done on some of these debt issues and spending issues. So I guess it's safe to say it's a messaging bill that you'll see this week on the House floor.
If we could redirect quickly back to this week, what other measures are on the congressional agenda before lawmakers head home next month to campaign for re-election?
You know, there's a suspension calendar, which is a lot of measures that come up. They need 2/3 vote to get done, and that's usually where you take care of easy stuff. You know, among those is the House is going to vote to accept the Frederick Douglass statue that the District of Columbia is going to provide them within 2 years. There are things on dealing with I think camping fees on federal land. So you know, a lot of housekeeping things. Given that they're going to be gone. Once they get out of here for this 1 or 2 week stretch here, they're going to be gone until after the election. This is basically a chance to take care of all the legislation, little bills that piled up during the summer that they didn't get to, and then deal with stuff before they go out for just as long a break here, a month-and-a-half break again.
Thanks for your time. Stephen Dinan is the politics editor for the Washington Times.
My pleasure.
Part of our live coverage on C-SPAN tomorrow will include a 9/11 Congressional Remembrance Ceremony, and that's at 11 a.m. Eastern. And our Facebook question focuses on the 9/11 anniversary, asking, how has America changed? You can go to our Facebook page and let us know. A bit of news as the House continues to vote. For the first time since the Treasury took control of AIG, American International Group, 4 years ago, the U.S. will be a minority shareholder after selling off at least $18 billion of the insurer's stock. Currently holding 53% of the company, a new deal could lower the U.S. stake to 15%, according to the New York Times. The National Journal writes that although the Treasury is expected to earn a profit, it's trying to distance itself from a widely unpopular bailout. As the stock market tumbled in the fall of 2008, AIG was rescued by the Bush administration when it injected $182 billion into the company, owning 92% at that time. Since then, the U.S. has slowly sold its holdings. Now, we have more about what's happening in the House this week from this morning's Washington Journal.
Joining us this morning to talk about the legislative agenda for Congress are Pete Kasperowicz from The Hill. He's the Floor Action blog reporter, and Jason Dick, House editor of Roll Call. Thanks to both of you for being here. Jason Dick, we're seeing that Congress may only be in for 2 weeks. What are the top priorities and why such a brief session?
It's actually a little less than 2 weeks, and that's primarily the House. We'll have a full 5-day work schedule, exhausting, I'm sure, this week, and then Monday and Tuesday will be off because of the Jewish High Holy Days. They'll come back on Wednesday and Thursday and Friday of the following week. So it's really 1.5 weeks.
And why such a short time here?
Well, part of it is the conventions. The conventions have gradually moved toward Labor Day as opposed to July 4th. I remember, you know, even 8 years ago we had July conventions, and some of the political analysts, I think, believe that it is, as long as they pushed it a little bit closer to Election Day, they could bring some advantage of that. So that's part of it. Right now we also have a Congress that particularly in the House that really believes in keeping some of their members back in the districts. And so the way that the schedule works out, sometimes it feels like they're rarely here. So they've been gone for 5 weeks, and they're going to be here again like a week and a half, and then they're off for another week, and then theoretically they're back for 1 more week, and then they go home until the elections. And then the lame duck starts when everything will be resolved.
Pete Kasperowicz, top issues on the agenda.
They have to do spending for 2013. We have about 2 weeks left before the end of the fiscal year, and so they've agreed already. In fact, they did this before they left for the break. They've agreed to a 6-month extension of spending for the next year, and that will avoid all the talk about possible shutdown, which would play into the election, which I think no party wants, and so they will be saved from this. None of us will be writing shutdown stories once they pass the bill. Then there are the 2 big issues remaining for the year would be taxes, what happens at the end of this year. Do the tax levels go up, or do they stay the same for some? And then the sequester, what happens to this big looming deadline of January where we have to start cutting money out according to the law passed last year. Those issues will be dealt with, we're pretty sure, in November and December.
If you'd like to talk about the congressional agenda, here are the numbers to call. Democrats, 202-737-0001. Republicans, 202-737-0002. And independent callers, 202-628-0205. Jason Dick, we're seeing some headlines about the Farm Bill and farmers. The New York Times says as Congress returns, it's politics as usual and a face-off with angry farmers. Are we likely to see farmers coming to Congress to lobby, and what will we hear for them?
I mean, we haven't seen any sort of suggestion that there will be tractors, you know, taking them all at this point, but I actually was in Missouri last week and covering the McCaskill Senate race, and it's amazing how often the Farm Bill comes up among sort of these regular folks that members of Congress and the presidential candidates say that they want to reach. And there is a lot of anxiety about whether Congress can find a way to get a Farm Bill done. I mean, you know, sometimes the Farm Bill is delayed a year. There are often fights about it, whether they're over payment, how much farmers get, or how much the food stamp program gets, so forth. But the thought that in the middle of a relatively brutal drought, there would be a you know, no Farm Bill to take home until the election is a little disturbing, I think, to a lot of the people who produce, you know, the bulk of the food supply in this country.
What kinds of things was Senator McCaskill hearing from constituents as she was out on the campaign trail?
It sort of depended what the audience was, and depending on where she was. She went to her alma mater, so at the University of Missouri in Columbia, and she spent a lot of time fielding biographical questions. You know, what got you interested in politics and so forth. Shifting venues, some people were actually, her message was that there are big differences between her and her Republican candidate, Todd Akin, a member of the House, over issues like student aid and Social Security and health care, and she was trying to hammer that home. And so there were some questions about health care. In one town, Warrensburg, which is a Dateline, she actually fielded quite a few questions. This is right outside of Kansas City, but is a farming community and home of the University of Central Missouri. A lot of questions about health care for veterans, some even about FEMA floodplain redistricting, which I hadn't heard as a huge topic. So it depended on the audience, but what was interesting to me was that people were engaged on a variety of topics. The CR, the funding bill for the next 6 months didn't really come up as much, but I think that if people would have understood what the details are, I think Congress is hoping that they can just kind of punt this and get it out of the way and not deal with it. To me, it's also just a kind of a colossal failure of dealing with the most basic function of government, which is to fund it. And you know, doing just a flat 6-month extension of spending doesn't really get you anywhere except, you know, par for the course.
And Pete Kasperowicz, sticking with the Farm Bill for a moment, there's more in it than what just relates to farmers in farm country. We're talking about other programs. Mm-hmm. Detail for us some other elements that are in the Farm Bill and why they're important.
Well, so much of it is the food stamp, or what they call SNAP, and that usually ends up being a major part of it. I think, and getting to what Jason was saying, so much of this shows how much the spending fight has mattered now. I mean, almost every bill they pass now, it comes down to one issue, which is how much will this cost? There's a lot of Republicans right now who don't like the fact that there's so many people on food stamps and that the money has gone up for food stamps. And there's a number of reasons for it. Some of it's just commodity price increases. Some of it's just that the economy's not doing well and people need them more. So, but every issue turns into this, and it stalls every issue. And every time we look at something that's dead in its tracks, it's because how much does it cost? It's the number one question that this hardcore group of Republicans is asking. And they end up slowing things down, and they end up getting their way on a lot of issues, too.
Well, let's get to the phones. We've got Pete Kasperowicz from the Hill and Jason Dick from Roll Call as our guests. Our first caller is Robert on the Republicans line in Logan, Utah. Good morning.
Good morning. My comment is about the Congress. The first 2 years of President Obama's time in Congress, he had both the Congress and the Senate, and he was able to pass a lot of legislation. However, most of that legislation, or at least a lot of it, was not very popular. And so the second Congress, the second House under his administration, was filled with those who were opposed to the things that he had passed. And that's why we have this gridlock right now. I think it's very unfortunate that we would give a president that kind of power and then to see the results because he made so many people unhappy with his Obamacare and his cap and trade and other things that he forced through the Congress without any Republican backing or support. Now, when you do that, you're going to alienate a large population of this country. I don't know if there'll be an overhang from that in this next election. If those people are still that angry over what he did, that he will not have support, and the Congress will again be divided because of his forcing through unpopular programs. My message to Congress would be to do what the Constitution gave them the power to do, and that is to stop legislation that is bad for the country and to try to come together. But from what I can see, and I've been watching this for a long time, there is no give on the Democratic side. The only way anything can come together is if the Republicans capitulate and do what the Democrats demand.
Let's go to Pete Kasperowicz for a response.
He's right. There's so much anger, and everyone's angry. And really, it's hard to see give on either side of it right now. You don't see the Republicans saying they can stand any tax increase. You don't see Democrats saying they can live with any program cuts. So no one is happy here at all. And again, it explains everything. It's not the Clinton administration where Clinton wanted to do what they call Hillary Care, and then the Republicans came in, and suddenly the era of big government is over. Those days are gone. This is a time where everyone's sticking to their position. You don't see any give, and it's hard on these issues like the fiscal cliff we talk about, the possible tax increase and the possible the sequester, the cuts coming. It's hard to see how anyone gives on this issue right now. Neither party seems willing to go anywhere down that road.
Jason Dick, how much are legislators counting on their party winning control of the House, the Senate, the White House come the election, and so they're pushing things off to the lame duck session?
I mean, they certainly have decided that really, except for the spending bill that will fund the rest of the government, that nothing is going to really, of substance, is going to get done there. If they were to be able to get even a short-term extension of the Farm Bill, it would be a real it would be a real feat, I think, or would shock the two of us at least. So this puts a lot of pressure on the lame duck. And this has been the plan all along. If you see the House schedule, the House has been counting on going into session after the election, since the beginning of the year. They're counting on at least 4 or 5 weeks of the lame duck. So this is a lot. There's going to be a lot of pressure on that lame duck to avert this big tax increase, to avert the sequester. The sequester came up, on the campaign trail too. I mean, people are aware of it, and they're sort of bracing for it. So a lot of pressure on the lame duck.
Denver, Colorado. Ina on our Democrats line. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you for C-SPAN. It's our one free voice, along with Wikipedia, the free encyclopedia. How many people who are listening now are 82, like I am, and have perfect long-term memory? And we remember when we had the best country in all the world because everybody had a chance. And don't be fooled. Grover Norquist is and absolutely has been the spokesperson, the lobbyist for the National Rifle Association. We have many powerful groups in this country. I've traveled extensively throughout the world. Every other developed country has health care. And in 1996, and please don't cut me off, Stephen Wiggins from United Health, or from Oxford Health Plans, took $111,900,000 in 1 year, and then he resigned. The average CEO of healthcare has a tenure of about 2 to 4 years. This greed is rampant, and when they can have people like the Koch brothers, who are privately owned, 2 people who form a group called ALEC, American Legislator Education, whatever it's called, ALEC, that has a $100 million donor club. And then we have the Supreme Court that also says that everybody has a right to have a AK-47 or something that's built for no reason except the well-regulated militia, which is our armed forces. This is outrageous.
You know, let me ask you. You said you lived a long life so far, and you said that you remember the best time. What was that best time?
The best time was during World War II, after World War II. I was born and raised in the depth of the Depression, when we had in many areas 100% unemployment.
Okay, we'll leave it there and look at this op-ed piece briefly by Charles Koch. He wrote this for the Wall Street Journal, the chairman and CEO of Koch Industries, someone who our caller just mentioned. Corporate cronyism harms America. It says when businesses feed at the federal trough, they threaten public support for businesses and free markets. Let's go on to Aaron, an independent caller in Hardinsburg, Indiana. Hi, Aaron.
Hello.
Good morning.
So I guess my issue really covers pretty much Democrats and Republicans from Congress down to local levels of government. Because one issue that has yet to been brought up and has kind of slid under all social issues that are being brought up right now, including religious issues and education and all that, is issues of labor. And by that I mean, you hear a lot of people talking about illegal immigrants coming to the country, but what you don't hear about is a page on the IRS website of 1099 subcontractor fraud. People are getting paid under the table in our own country that are American citizens, which is something that is not brought up and not played up as a huge issue, though it's definitely an issue if it's getting put up on the IRS tax website.
Jason Dick, any chance Congress would be taking up issues along the lines that Aaron called about?
It's pretty unlikely. They've had several opportunities in the last few years when things were not as tense and polarized to address immigration, and they did not. And it's remains to be seen whether there's an appetite for that in the coming years, but it's unlikely to happen anytime soon.
Park City, Illinois. Pat is on our Republicans line. Good morning, Pat.
Hello. I had voted for Republicans last year, although I did vote for Obama. But kind of disappointed that Republicans didn't do what they said that they were going to do. They made all kinds of promises, and all we see is a lot of problems from the Congress and the others, the House Representatives and all the other stuff. But it's just very saddening to not see a lot of things pass for what we already have, you know, like the Farm Bill and other things like that. And I also have one comment. Please read Rolling Stone magazine. It was a free magazine that I had gotten, and kind of explains what Romney's about, you know. And I was kind of disappointed to hear what he was about, dismantling companies and taking jobs overseas. And I do support the unions, and I do support the farm bills, you know, because people do have to eat. But I'm hoping that they can come together and not have too many discriminations against the poor and the middle class, because we are the people of the United States of America. That's all I have to say, but thank you very much.
Pete Kasperowicz with the Hill, a response for our caller.
Well, again, everyone's unhappy. A lot of Republicans came up at the end of their spring and summer session, and they weren't happy either, and they were saying we wanted to cut a lot more. What ended up happening is they wrestled the government down to almost a spending freeze, but not quite. And it was interesting to watch how even when you don't freeze spending when it's at record high levels, the anger that happens, and a lot of people worry about what happens to women and children, what happens to people who rely on these programs. So it's two totally different ways of looking at it. The people who want to defend those programs don't want any cut, but they also want growth in those programs. A lot of Republicans who want to see them cut, they get in trouble even just for slowing the rate of growth sometimes. So again, money's central to all these questions, and it's driving every debate they have. And again, it's the reason for everything being slow.
Comment on Twitter says, the government that does nothing does the least amount of damage. Why is everyone afraid of the lame duck Congress? Jason Dick, what's the danger of inaction, of Congress not acting before the end of the year? Lay out some of the looming fiscal cliff issues for us.
Well, on the, I hesitate to call this the positive side, but if Congress were to do nothing after the election, if they were all to head down to the Bahamas or something like that, go marlin fishing, then the tax rates would spring back to the levels that we were at during the Clinton administration. So the top tax rate, I believe, would be 39.6%, and some of the other rates would go up. The payroll tax extension would also go away, so that we would have everyone would feel that almost immediately. There would be more withheld for Social Security in all of our paychecks, and then the automatic defense and domestic spending cuts would go into effect. That now, on the, as I said, I hesitate to call it positive, but on the positive side of that, the deficit would be cut, and this has become like the big reason for almost, as he was saying, every bill that comes down the pike is framed in a spending fight. So the deficit would go down. What almost every credible economist in the country is saying also is that this would also put us right back into the recession, because people would have a lot less money to spend just on a day-to-day, never mind taking a vacation or looking at replacing your 10-year-old car. This would be, you would probably go to brand X of detergent because you just literally have less money in your paycheck. As well as the fact that people are anticipating having less at the end of the year because they'll be paying more in taxes. So some of the, even the more conservative estimates are somewhere from
Mr. Carter of Texas. Mr. Carter of Texas votes aye.
The yeas are 377, the nays are none. Two-thirds being the affirmative, the rules are suspended. The bill is agreed to, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. The unfinished business is the vote on the motion of the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Dole, to suspend the rules and pass H.R. 2139 is amended, on which the yeas and nays are ordered. The clerk will report the title.
H.R. 2139, a bill to require the Secretary of the Treasury to mint coins in commemoration of the centennial of the establishment of Lions Club International.
Question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass the bill as amended? Members will record their votes by electronic device. This is a 5-minute vote.
Members voting on a bill that directs the Treasury Department to mint and issue $1 coins to recognize the centennial of the Lions Club. As the House votes, here's a bit more about that temporary spending bill that's expected on the House floor on Thursday. The Congressional Quarterly writes that it's a compromise aimed at allowing lawmakers to return to their campaigns without the threat of a potential government shutdown hanging over the elections, and that appropriators might unveil the text of the fiscal 2013 resolution as early as tomorrow.
The yeas are 376, the nays are no. One recorded as present, two-thirds being in the affirmative. The rules are suspended. The bill is passed, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. The unfinished business is the vote on the motion of the gentleman from Illinois, Mrs. Biggert, to suspend the rules and pass H.R. 6186, on which the yeas and nays are ordered. The clerk will report the bill.
H.R. 6186, a bill to require a study of voluntary community-based flood insurance options and how such options could be incorporated into the National Flood Insurance Program and for other purposes.
Question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass the bill? Members will record their votes by electronic device. This is a 5-minute vote.
The last vote of the day on a bill that would require FEMA to conduct a study of voluntary community-based flood insurance programs and how they could be incorporated into the National Flood Insurance Program. Today, we covered a number of events, including reporters who focused on the federal budget discussing the so-called fiscal cliff, and also leaders from the federal government and business on suicide prevention among civilians and veterans. You can see both of those after the House is out here on C-SPAN and right now at cspan.org.
On this vote, the yeas are 364, the nays are 11, two-thirds being in the affirmative. The rules are suspended. The bill is passed. And without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table.
We're going to do the leaves of absence. So you're just...
The chair lays before the House the following personal request.
Leave of absence requested for Ms. Napolitano of California for today.
Without objection, the request is granted. Will members please clear the well and take their seats? Thank you, Tom. Chair would ask all members to please clear the well and take their seats. Which side are you starting from? Entertain requests for 1-minute speeches. For what purpose does the gentleman from South Carolina rise? Without objection, the gentleman will suspend. Chair would ask all members to please take their conversations from the floor. Please remove themselves from the well and from the aisles. The gentleman from South Carolina is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, on Friday, the Bureau of Labor Statistics released the latest jobs report. For 43 months, our nation's unemployment rate has remained above 8%. Last month, only 96,000 more people found jobs, and sadly, 368,000 people were discouraged and defeated and gave up searching for jobs. To make matters worse, for persons with jobs, the average hourly wages decreased, and labor force participation is the lowest in 31 years. The President's policies have failed to create jobs, failed to encourage economic growth, and failed to reassure hardworking Americans that we can restore hope for American families. The American people deserve better. They deserve leadership in Washington that will fight to create jobs. It is past time for the liberal-controlled Senate to act on the dozens of bipartisan bills the House has passed and approved promoting jobs for American families. In conclusion, God bless our troops, and we will never forget September 11th and the global war on terrorism.
The gentleman yields back. The chair would ask members to have the courtesy to remove their conversations from the floor, to take their seats. For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas seek recognition?
I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, Texans are growing more concerned about the rising cost of gasoline. One lady recently wrote me, "My husband drives a truck. As gas prices rise, so does the cost of diesel. This affects the cost of every single thing we buy, including food. Gasoline prices are the one thing that people should not need to worry about. We have the resources, but Washington keeps them under lock and key. And we still import half our oil from unstable dictators like Chavez and OPEC monopoly. Americans can no longer afford to be beholden to the turmoil in the Middle East. So what about this idea? The United States, Mexico, and Canada are rich with God-given natural resources. So working together in a new strategic energy partnership, our three nations could become the world's new energy superpower alliance to compete with OPEC. Let's create an energy supply built to last with our North American allies and finally make OPEC and Middle Eastern dictators irrelevant." And that's just the way it is. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentlelady from Texas seek recognition?
To address the House for 1 minute.
Gentlelady asks unanimous consent.
I ask unanimous consent.
Without objection.
Thank you. Speaker, just recently it was announced that 50 million Americans experienced food insecurity and experienced it in the last year. What that means is that families in the United States suffer without food. Predominant number of those are single parents and children. What are we as a country if we allow children to go hungry in this particular great land? I just came back from Africa and saw children who were hungry, but yet we were there to encourage better technology to promote agricultural development. But today, this Congress, this House, Republican Congress, is cutting $16 billion from the Supplemental Nutrition Program. We can do better. I want to work with this Congress to ensure that 50 million people, 50 million Americans are not hungry in this great land. Let us revisit the cutting of the Supplemental Nutrition Program because our children are begging. They're asking us, do we care? We do care. We cannot cut $16 billion from the Supplemental Nutrition Program with 50 million Americans experiencing food insecurity. Working Americans, Americans with children, time to stop is now to support those families. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Pennsylvania seek recognition?
Unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute, revise and extend.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, tomorrow our nation will mark the 11th anniversary of the terrorist attacks of September 11, 2001. At community gatherings across the country, neighbors will come together to honor the memory of those lost in New York, Pennsylvania, and our nation's capital, including a ceremony in Bucks County at the 9/11 Garden of Reflection, the official Pennsylvania memorial to the victims of the September 11th attacks. As I stand before you this evening, I'm reminded of the President's address to the nation the evening of the attacks. In his remarks to the nation, the President said that terrorist attacks can shake the foundations of our biggest buildings, but they cannot touch the foundation of America. These acts shatter steel, but they cannot dent the steel of American resolve. 11 years later, our resolve has never been stronger, and we continue to honor the memory of those tragically lost that day. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. Seeing no other requests for time, under the Speaker's announced policy of January 5, 2011, the gentleman from Connecticut, Mr. Courtney, is recognized for 60 minutes as the designee of the Minority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And here we are today on September 10th, 5 weeks since Speaker Boehner pushed through a motion to recess for 5 weeks at a time when our nation faces so many challenges, so many ticking clocks in terms of must-do items, some of which have already cleared the U.S. Senate, like the Farm Bill. And yet, despite that need out there from the country looking for some action and certainty out of this chamber, the majority again said, nope, we're going home for 5 weeks, and we're going to leave dairy farmers whose price supports expired on August 31st left hanging in the breeze, despite the fact that the U.S. Senate has passed a farm bill with Dairy Security Act provisions that reforms the price structure, saves the taxpayer money, and provides some horizon so that the folks who are getting up every morning and milking cows could have some certainty in terms of whether or not their business, their operations have any sense of a future. They are losing money every day in New England. The feed costs, the high energy costs, and the Dairy Security Act, which was part of the Senate Farm Bill, and by the way was also incorporated in the House Agriculture Committee in its committee bill, will in fact provide that sense of security and future for dairy farmers. Yet the Speaker put through a motion to recess for 5 weeks. And August 31st has come and gone, and these guys and women are out there, and they are faced with total fear, and that is the faces that I saw when I was home in August about the fact that this Congress, particularly the House of Representatives controlled by the Republicans, refused to take up a farm bill despite the fact that we had weeks of time to do it before the expiration of the price supports for dairy farmers. Obviously, American agriculture is far broader than just the dairy industry. It also includes commodity crops in the great Midwest, which are facing a historic drought right now, where the security of crop insurance is so important. And joining me here this evening to report in from the Midwest is a great congressman from eastern Iowa, my colleague and friend, Congressman Bruce Braley, and I'd like to yield to Mr. Braley to talk about what the lack of a farm bill means in your great state.
Well, I thank my friend for yielding, and the thing that I think we need to focus on at the beginning is 62 days. It's been 62 days since the House Agriculture Committee reported a strong bipartisan farm bill that passed out of committee after extensive debate and numerous amendments, and that's on the heel of the Senate Ag Committee passing a farm bill with strong bipartisan support that passed the entire Senate, where it's incredibly difficult to pass anything these days, with a strong bipartisan vote. So I think the question on the minds of many of my constituents in Iowa's 1st District is, when is the House going to vote on a farm bill, which in the past has always been a bipartisan priority of the House and the Senate. Now, my district in Iowa has been burning up all summer. Almost every part of the 1st District of Iowa has been classified as extreme drought conditions. Now, what does that mean? Well, I'll tell you what it means to the eye when you go out and visit the farms that I visited back in the 1st District in July and August. Corn that normally fills up an entire ear, and the ear is typically about this long, now is coming out on ears that are this long, that if you're lucky has a fraction of the kernels per ear that you would normally see in a typical Iowa cornfield. Stalks of corn were burning up in July and had to be chopped because they have no value other than the insurance policy that was in place on those crops, because commodity insurance has been available to those farmers. Soybeans were more fortunate because they weren't burning up and got late rain that allowed them to mature, and we're hopeful that the bean crop will not be as devastated to the extent that the corn is. This is profound, it's real, it's going to have dramatic implications for the cost of food in this country, for the cost of fuel in this country, and while we sit here and do nothing in the House to get a farm bill reported out and to conference committee, farmers back in my district are looking at what's going to happen this fall when they face dramatically reduced yields. Then we roll into the period of time this winter when they're buying crop inputs for next spring. All of these things have enormous ripple effects on our domestic economy. Then you look at what's happening with our nutrition programs, which will also be expiring on September 30th. And we know how many people depend on those nutrition programs. Who are they? Most of them are seniors, the elderly who depend on those food stamp programs. It's people who are disabled and on fixed incomes and working and are underemployed right now. So this failure to act is having profound consequences for the people I represent in Iowa. I've done 14 listening posts on the Farm, Food, and Jobs bill in Iowa this summer, and we get people from across the spectrum who will be dramatically impacted if Congress fails to act. You look at the Rural Economic Development title of the Farm Bill, it has profound implications throughout this country. And it's not based on whether a district is blue or red or purple. Every single district in this country is impacted by our failure to act. And that's why I'm glad to be here tonight talking about these implications. And I hope to be bringing to the floor soon a discharge petition that has been delayed because of the inaction on this bill, but that will give every member of the House of Representatives the opportunity to go down and record on a piece of paper whether they want to see a farm bill brought to the floor for a vote, an up or down vote. And I encourage all of my colleagues to take a serious look at joining me in signing that discharge petition so we finally get action on a long overdue piece of legislation.
Will the gentleman yield on that
I'll be happy
point?
to yield back to my colleague.
I think your last point about the fact that we are now at a place where the Democratic minority is finding itself in a position where they really have almost no choice but to seek a discharge petition. The fact is that this week the majority, Speaker Boehner's office and the House Majority Leader, Congressman Cantor, issued their agenda for the week, which lists the bills that they are proposing to take up for votes. And for those listening around the country, I think it's important to remember that the Republican majority controls that agenda. I mean, that is something that we have no control in our caucus of adding or subtracting. And looking at that agenda this week, you know, I was hoping when I got back from the 5-week break that the Speaker's office would have responded to what is happening all over the country, which is a hue and cry demanding action on a farm bill. But the fact is as I think the gentleman from Iowa knows, is that there's nothing on that agenda that indicates we are going to take up a farm bill this week. Incredible. I mean, just amazing that, you know, at a time when the American Farm Bureau has been doing a circuit throughout the Midwest, holding hearings, holding events, drawing attention to this fact, even in New England and Connecticut, which is not viewed as a sort of agriculture powerhouse. I mean, the fact is I had roundtables with the Connecticut Farm Bureau who are just dumbfounded that an issue like this could get sort of swept up in the just sort of do-nothing record of the Republican majority in this Congress. And I also think it's important for people to remember the Senate Farm Bill, which passed, as the gentleman indicated, on a bipartisan basis, actually saves the taxpayers $23 billion over the next 5 years. It came in with a lower cost than the baseline from the last Farm Bill, so it actually helps the deficit situation. The House Agriculture Committee bill that you mentioned that got reported out also reduces the deficit. Again, I think it went a little too heavy in terms of the reductions on the nutrition side, but I am confident that that can get worked out in a conference committee if the House would take up a bill and send a bill to conference committee. But the fact of the matter is your leadership in terms of bringing out a discharge petition is probably not something that you woke up thinking you'd love to do 6 months from now, but it's really an act of necessity because this majority will not even send a signal that anything's even being planned to take up a bill this week. And
would the gentleman yield? I think the thing that's so disturbing to so many of us who represent parts of rural America that are heavily dependent on agriculture is this has never been a partisan stalemate in the past. Usually the Farm Bill bogs down over regional differences, over how you structure a bill that's going to get the necessary support to get the necessary votes on the floor. There's strong bipartisan support here in the House among our colleagues. Earlier, Congressman Welch initiated a Dear Colleague letter that got 60 signatures calling on leadership in both the House Democrats and Republicans to come together, get this bill to the floor, bring it for an up or down vote so that people get to see who's willing to put their vote behind crafting a bipartisan bill that can get support and move this country forward. And that's the disturbing thing, is I'm confident that there would be broad support across this chamber to get a bill on the floor, to have an amendment process to allow people to offer amendments to improve the bill. That's what happens in committee. That's what happened in this particular case. But when we can't even get a bill to the floor, and everything we're hearing is that there's no plan to bring a bill to the floor before the election, and then you look at everything that's being pushed back into the so-called lame duck session, which you know, Congressman Courtney, is one of the worst times to bring people together with everything going on. It's very frustrating because this is a bill that could have and should have been passed before the August recess, and that's why it's so frustrating. I yield back.
Well, yeah, and this week I think we are going to see the impact outside of the Beltway, because it's my understanding that over 30 to 50 groups are going to be converging on Washington